before I go there, I just need to reflect for a moment on the lessons that we have learnt over the last 2 decades. And I'm going to make reference now to 3 studies. They are incredibly important studies, helping us to understand that what matters really are people and preparation. The first study is the impact of catastrophes on shareholder value. This study was undertaken in the mid-90s by Deborah Pretty and Rory Knight. They discerned that you could determine in the first 10 to 50 days of a major catastrophic event which companies were going to recover and which companies were not going to recover. The recoverers were companies where there was a lesser impact on cash, impacts on society, fatalities, but most importantly also those where management responsibility was identified, but more to the point, where management's talent in the new circumstances in which they found themselves was such that confidence was being regained. In fact, one of the principal conclusions of the report was that the dominant factor which influenced recovery or non-recovery was not the direct impacts on cash and so forth, but in fact it was the indirect factor of management talents in these abnormal, adverse circumstances. Why? Because it caused third parties to reassess future cash flows and future prospects of the company, given the management talents that were hitherto not reflected in the value of the organisation. There are 2 additional reports which have recently been published by IRMIC, and at this point I'd like to thank IRMIC CEO John Hurrell for the provision of this information, and also the next slide that I think you will find really interesting. The points on this slide here are self-explanatory. What matters? What story are they telling us? They're telling us that people matter, that preparation matters, and that proving and testing matters. When we look at the results of those 2 reports, Roads to Ruin and Roads to Resilience, which I think are a must-read for any chief officer in an organisation, we think of the RMI tell me, show me, prove it to me tests. What are those tests? When we start the conversation with the CEO of an organisation, with the chair of the audit committee, the chair of the risk committee, whichever it will be, we ask them to tell us about the long-range plan, about the strategic plan, about the risk management framework, the board audit committee and risk committee. And we will be told about the very good people that no doubt exist within those committees and so forth. We'll be told of the external attestations, exemplary attestations quite often. And we will walk away from those meetings feeling, good Lord, this is really quite a good organisation. We will score them in our minds 9 out of 10. The conversation develops as the relationship develops, and we ask people to show us their risk registers, show us the strategic plans, show us how objectives are linked to risks, or more to the point, risks are linked to objectives. Show us the top 5 contingency plans for the top 5 risks on the corporate register. We become disappointed quite often. The scores drop to 5 out of 10. We find that risk registers are incomplete. There are no objectives stated. We find that, for example, risk appetite statements, if they do exist, and they don't always exist, are rarely ever communicated out to the key constituents within the organisation. We then move on in the relationship and we ask the RMI prove it to me questions. Prove to me that the top 5 risks are really the right top 5 risks. Prove to me that the risk register is not just a list of risks. The scores in this instance will drop to 2 out of 10. So the RMI tell me, show me, prove it to me tests result in scores of 9 out of 10 to 5 or 6 out of 10 to 2 or 3 out of 10. This happens in nearly every instance. This is an incredible slide from IRMIC. This slide reminds me of the cliche, a picture paints 1,000 words. What do these pictures say to me? What do they say to us in RMI? The bottom right-hand corner describes that we have a turtle. This turtle moves very slowly, and when danger lurks, it will retract into its shell. This turtle reminds me very much of the typical customer that we will talk to, having the RMI tell me, show me, prove it to me questions and answers. We won't dwell very long on the bottom left-hand picture because this is a company that's not evolving and will shortly die. The top left-hand quadrant gives a very striking image, an image of a herd of deer where every deer has a role in being alert and awake to the issues, alert and awake to possible threats. It reminds us very much of the difference between risk as a bolt-on and risk as a built-in feature of the fabric of the organization. Think of it this way. I remember some years ago being told of the US motor manufacturing philosophy, which was that the best people existed at the end of the production line. They were the quality assurance people. They checked that the car was functioning according to the specifications. Some years later, the Japanese decided that they could do it better. They wanted to increase efficiency. They wanted cars to last longer. But they decided that in order to do that, that everybody on the production line had to be as good as the quality folk at the end of the production line in the States, because they determined that everybody had a role to play in quality assurance. The very same applies in the case of risk management. Risk needs to be a built-in feature of the fabric and the culture of the organization and not a bolt-on, as would be the case where you have the risk management department and people either acknowledge or informally acknowledge that risk is somebody else's responsibility, the responsibility of those folk in the risk management department. Risk needs to be built in. The final image, roads to resilience, is an image of a shoal of fish which, when the great white shark lurks, they all instinctively respond and come together in a fashion that hopefully will avert danger.